In the twilight of the northern kingdom of the Dunedain, many fates of Middle-earth would be forever decided, and the downfall of kings and kingdoms also gave rise to many other tales. Today, in this third and last episode, we will take a closer look at how the kingdom of Arnor fell to the Witch King of Angmar. Last time we ended with the destruction of the watchtower of Amansul in 1409. In that battle, King Arvelek I fell, as well as the last prince of Cardolan. So our tale continues from the rule of Arvelek's son, King Araphor, the 9th king of Arthedain. The year was 1409 of the Third Age, and the Witch King and his forces had been driven back to Angmar. Araphor was only 18 when he became king after his father's untimely death. Though this was a young age for one of the Númenórean blood, he was valiant. This also resulted in Araphor becoming the second longest ruler of the northern line after Valandil, the son of Isildur. For a time it seemed like peace would return to Arnor, but while things remained peaceful in Arnor, a civil war broke out in Gondor, the kin strife, which we will talk more about in detail another time. In 1473, Araphor would have a son named Argeleb, most likely named after his great-grandfather, Argeleb I, that fell in the war with Rudar, as we covered in the last episode. Araphor's later rule was rather uneventful. The kingdom still licked its wounds after the Witch King's attack, trying to rebuild what had been destroyed. In 1589, Araphor died of old age, and his son Argeleb II became the new king. It was during his reign the hobbits and Bree started to migrate west in 1601. Two of these hobbits were Fallowhides, the brothers Marco and Blanco, who led a group of mostly half-wood hobbits westwards from Bree to settle in new lands. They are regarded as the founders of the Shire and are quite famous among hobbits. King Argeleb II granted them permission to cross the Bridge of Stonebows and to settle the land beyond the Barrow-wight. Before this time, it had simply been the royal hunting grounds of the king. In return, the king demanded the hobbits acknowledged his lordship and maintaining all bridges and roads so that the royal messengers could pass if needed. 29 years later, in 1630, store hobbits from Dunland joined them and settled in the Shire. Many of these store hobbits would settle in the East Farthing. In the eyes of the other hobbits of the Shire, they were seen to have some rather odd customs. They didn't seem afraid of the river, like the others, and they also wore dwarf boots in muddy weather. Not to mention that they could grow facial hair, and these stores had unusual names and words, adopted from Dunland. These many differences would survive for long and become more present as Buckland would be founded in 2340, but more about that another day. Only 5 years after the store settled, a new evil rose in the east, but this time it was quite different from what had been seen before. The Great Plague. First it spread in Rovanion and killed many in its way. The year after, in 1636, the plague struck Gondor. This devastated the kingdom and many died, including the king Telimnar and his children. The plague would slowly spread north towards Arnor. Most of the people of Cardolan died from the Great Plague, especially in Minhiriath. After that, the region was almost completely deserted, but some survivors of the plague continued to live in Tarbad, which was still an important city because of its location and the trade on the Great South Road. The Witch King eyed an opportunity to strike his enemies and sent from Angmar evil spirits towards the Barrow-downs. Their true nature is somewhat obscure, but they infested and haunted the tombs of the Barrow-downs. They stirred the dead bones into mounds and haunted them, the barrow-wights. The barrow-wights appeared as shadowy figures with a pale, icy light gleaming from what would be their eyes. They could speak with deep, hollow, and cold voices, and likewise, their touch was icy. They were furthermore infamous for carrying rattling gold rings on their bony fingers. They spread terror in Arnor, and the people came to know them as barrow-wights. The same beings Frodo and the hobbits encounter in the Fellowship of the Ring. Some of these evil spirits occupied the cairn of the last prince of Cardolan. It is likely that Merry saw the last memories of the last prince in his dream in the tomb, simply because he mentioned the attack by the men of Khand Dûm and the spear in his heart. The following year of 1637, the Great Plague had spread so far north that the hobbits of the Shire began dying of the plague. They suffered great loss, but survived. The plague did not hit Arthedain as hard as in Cardolan, but still the plague weakened their kingdom, already greatly weakened by the Witch King. After Argeleb II, his son Arvedui became king. Arvedui lived for 190 years, longer than any of his descendants until Aragorn. By the standards of his own ancestors, though, this is considered an early death. Of all the northern kings before Arvedui, excepting those slain in battle, only 2 had lived less than 200 years. His father Argaleb II and his grandfather Araphor. This was a clear sign that the lifespan of the Dunedain was slowly dwindling. Not much happened during his reign. He named his son Arvelec after his great-great-grandfather, who fought against the might of the Witch King and fell in combat. Arvelec II was born only 3 years before the Great Plague hit Arnor. Not much happened in the lifetime of Arvelec II, except King Telumethar of Gondor conquered Umbar and took the name Umbarakil. Arvelec's son Araval, on the other hand, is an interesting ruler. When Araval came to the throne of Arthedain, the kingdom had been at war with Angmar for 400 years roughly, and the Dunedain had achieved very little in preventing the power of the Witch King from spreading. In 1851, the Witch King attack renewed, and he attacked the kingdom of Arnor once again. But Araval, in coalition with the elves of Lindon and Rivendell, went to battle with the forces of Angmar and returned victorious. This must have been a setback for the Witch King. It may seem just like a random new attack on the kingdom, but in the same year, the Wainriders attacked Gondor in the south, and this makes me believe that these attacks were in fact instructed by Sauron himself. While the Witch King's plan failed, the Wainriders in the south were rather successful in their attacks on Gondor. Araval's victory gave hope to his people, and he sought to rebuild the kingdom to its former glory. After the victory, he attempted to reoccupy Cardolan and send people down there to settle in the desolate lands, but the barrow-wights terrified anyone who attempted to dwell near them, and thus Araval's plans failed in the end. In 1864, only 13 years after the victory, Arvedui was born, son of Araphand and grandson of Araval. At his birth, Malbeth the seer spoke to Araphand, "Arvedui you shall call him, for he will be the last in Arthedain, though a choice will come to the Dunedain. And if they take the one that seemed less hopeful, then your son will change his name and become king of a great realm. If not, then much sorrow and many lives of men shall pass, until the Dunedain arise and are united again." And thus Araphand named his son Arvedui, meaning last king. After Araval's death, in 1891, his son Araphand became king. Despite his father's successes, Angmar rebuilt its strength and continued to attack Arthedain, and it was during his reign that the resistance against Angmar started to fail. The long silence and estrangement between the southern kingdom of Gondor and the northern kingdom came to an end. Araphand took counsel with the king of Gondor, Ondohir. Both Ondohir and Araphand realized that a single force was behind these attacks on both their kingdoms. This was indeed Sauron working from the shadows. While they did not exactly know who was behind this evil, they knew they had a better chance if they worked together, and thus an alliance was formed between Arnor and Gondor in 1940, when Arvedui wedded Firiel, daughter of Ondohir. An interesting side note here is that only 2 years before this alliance was made, Borondil, steward of Gondor, created the Horn of Arab. It would become an heirloom of the stewards, and one day pass to Boromir, as we see in The Lord of the Rings. This alliance, however, proved fruitless, as neither kingdom could spare help for the other. Arthedain was soon attacked by the forces of the Witch King, whilst Gondor was under renewed attacks by the Wainriders. Only 4 years later, in 1944, Ondohir and his sons Artemir and Faramir were slain in battle against the Wainriders that became known as the Disaster of Morannon. Even the king's nephew, Minotaur, was overwhelmed and slain by an arrow only a few days after the death of the king. The kingdom of Gondor was left without a king, and the steward Pelendur took up the rule until a new king was elected. The Wainriders considered themselves victorious and thought the rest of Gondor would fall easily now that they had defeated the army of the king. Unbeknownst to them, Eärnur, commander of the southern army, had crossed the Haradrim in southern Ithilien and was racing north to the aid of the northern army. His attack upon the feasting Wainriders, later known as the Battle of the Camp, defeated the Wainriders and sent them fleeing back into the east. Arvedui knew that the death of Ondohir is what his prophecy talked about, and so he sent messages to Gondor claiming the kingship, both as a direct descendant of Isildur, whom Arvedui said had never relinquished his royalty in Gondor, and secondly, as the husband of Firiel, who under Old Númenórean law should have become the first ruling queen after the death of the two brothers. The year after, in 1945, Arvedui's claim was rejected by the Council of Gondor, and here Pelennor played a key part. The Council of Gondor answered, "The crown and royalty of Gondor belongs solely to the heirs of Menelil, son of Anarion, to whom Isildur relinquished this realm. In Gondor, this heritage is reckoned through the sons only, and we have not heard that the law is otherwise in Arnor." To this Arvedui replied, "Elendil had two sons, of whom Isildur was the elder and the heir of his father. We've heard that the name of Elendil stands to this day as the head of the line of kings of Gondor, since he was accounted the high king of all the lands of the Dunedain. While Elendil still lived, the conjoined rule in the south was committed to his sons, but when Elendil fell, Isildur departed to take up the high kingship of his father, and committed the rule in the south in like manner to the son of his brother. He did not relinquish his royalty in Gondor, nor intend that the realm of Elendil should be divided forever. Moreover, in Numenor of old, the scepter descended to the eldest child of the king, whether man or woman. It is true that the law has not been observed in the lands of exile, ever troubled by war, but such was the law of our people, to which we now refer, seeing that the sons of Andorhir died childless." To this Gondor made no answer. The crown was granted to the victorious general Eärnur, and it was granted to him with the approval of all the Dunedain and Gondor, since he was of the royal house. He was the son of Siriandil, son of Kalimakil, son of Archirias, who was brother to King Narmakil II. Arvedui did not press his claim, for he had neither the power nor the will to oppose the choice of the Dunedain of Gondor. Yet the claim was never forgotten by his descendants, even when the kingship had passed away, a claim that Aragorn much later would make use of. Eärnur was a wise man and not arrogant, even if, as to most men in Gondor, the realm in Arthedain seemed a small thing for all the lineage of its lords. He sent messages to Arvedui, announcing that he received the crown of Gondor according to the laws and the needs of the South Kingdom. "But I do not forget the loyalty of Arnor, nor deny our kinship, nor wish that the realms of Elendil should be estranged. I will send you aid when you have need, so far as I am able." It was, however, long before Eärnur felt himself secure enough to do as he promised. In Arnor, the attacks from Angmar continued, and in 1964, King Araphor died, and the kingdom passed to his son Arvedui. Malbeth the Seer was still a royal councillor to the king of Arthedain, and his gift of foresight might have been useful in more ways than we know. During Arvedui's short reign, he came with the second prophecy we know. Malbeth foretold Aragorn's passage through the paths of the dead. "O'er the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles to the tomb of kings. Doom approaches, the dead awaken. For the hour has come for the oathbreakers. At the stone of Eric they shall stand again, and hear their horn in the hills ringing. Who shall the horn be? Who shall call them? From the grey twilight the forgotten people. The heir of him to whom the oath they swore. From the north shall he come, need shall drive him. He shall pass the door of the path of the dead." While these words might have meant little to Arvedui, he surely knew that the first prophecy of Malbeth had not been in his favour, and that he would indeed be the last king of Arthedain. In the autumn of 1973, messages came to Gondor that Arthedain was in great danger, and that the Witch King was preparing a last stroke against it. Then Eärnur sent his son Eärnur north with a fleet as swiftly as he could, and with as great strength as he could spare. They were sailing towards Grey Havens, but this aid was sent too late. In 1974, before the winter ended, the Witch King's invasion began. He captured the capital of Fornost and drove most of the remaining Dunedain over the river Lune. Among them were the sons of Arvedui, of whom we only know Aranarth. Arvedui held out in the North Downs, north of Fornost. He had fled the city with two palantiri, the stone of Annúminas and the stone of Amansul. Here he and his men held out to the last, but was forced to flee in the end. Arvedui fled north with some of his guard, and they escaped by the swiftness of their horses. They rode to the northern end of the Blue Mountains, and for a while Arvedui hid in the tunnels of the old dwarf mines near the far end of the mountains. These mines had once been used by the Broadbeams and Firebeards, but early in the Second Age, many of them migrated east and settled in Khazad-dûm with the Longbeards. It's unknown if the mines were entirely abandoned or if Arvedui and his guard came in contact with a few dwarves. In any case, he was driven at last by hunger to seek the help of the Lossoth, the snowmen of Fordokill. The Lossoth are known as strange, unfriendly people, remnant of the Fordograith, men of far-off days, accustomed to the bitter colds of the realm of Morgoth. They house in the snow, and it's said that they can run on ice with bones on their feet, and they have carts without wheels. They were people afraid of the Witch King, and they believed he could control elements like frost and thaw. At some point the Lossoth had retreated to the Cape of Fordokill, inaccessible to hostile peoples who harassed them, and it was some of these snowmen King Arvedui found in camp by the seashore. But they did not help the king willingly, for he had nothing to offer them save a few jewels, which they didn't regard as valuable. The Lossoth decided to help regardless, partly out of pity for the gaunt king and his men, and partly out of fear of their weapons. They gave them a little food and built for them snow huts. There Arvedui was forced to wait during the winter, hoping for help from the south, for his horses had perished in the harsh conditions. It is likely that Arvedui had sent one of his men south to the other Dunedain, for his son Aranarth knew of his journey to the Bay of Fordokill. When Círdan heard from Aranarth of the king's flight to the north, he sent a ship north to Fordokill to seek for him. The ship came at last, after many days because of contrary winds, and the mariners saw from afar the little fire of driftwood which the lost men contrived to keep alight. For the winter was long in losing its grip, and though it was March, the ice was only beginning to break and lay far out from the shore. When the snowmen saw the ship, they were amazed and afraid, for they had seen no such ship on the sea within their memories. But they had become more friendly now, and they drew the king and his followers out over the ice on their sliding carts as far as they dared. In this way a boat from the ship was able to reach them. But the snowmen were uneasy, for they smelled danger in the wind, and the chief of the Lossoth said to Arvedui, "Do not mount on this sea monster. If they have them, let the seamen bring us food and other things that we need. And you may stay here till the Witch King goes home. For in summer his power wanes, but now his breath is deadly, and his old arm is long." But Arvedui did not take his counsel. He thanked him, and at parting gave him his ring, saying, "This is a dung of worth beyond your reckoning, for its ancestry alone. It has no power, save the esteem in which those hold it who love my house. It will not help you, but if ever you are in need, my kin will ransom it with great store of all that you desire." This ring was the ring of Barrow-wight that Aragorn wears in the Lord of the Rings. The ring which Finrod Felagund gave to Barrow-wight and Beren recovered at great peril. Because of this gift, the ring was saved, but it was afterwards ransomed and became an heirloom among the chieftains of the Dunedain. While Arvedui did not listen to the counsel of the Lossoth, it was good counsel, by chance or by foresight, for the ship had not reached the open sea when a great storm of wind arose and came with a blinding snow out of the north, and it drove the ship back upon the ice and piled ice up against it. Even the elven mariners of Círdan were helpless, and in the night the ice crushed the hull, and the ship foundered, and so perished King Arvedui, last king of Arnor, and with him the 2 palantiri he brought with him. In the north only one palantir remained, the palantir of Elastirion, which we discussed in the first episode. It was first long afterwards that news of the shipwreck of Fordokill and the death of Arvedui was learned from the snowmen. The Shire folk survived, though war swept over them, and most of them fled into hiding. To the help of the king, they sent some archers who never returned. We never learn what happens around Bree, despite the fact it lay not far south of Fornost. Yet somehow the village survived and wasn't destroyed by the Witch King. When Eärnur and the forces of Gondor at last came to the Grey Havens, there was joy and great wonder among the elves and men. So great and draught, and so many were his ships, that they could scarcely find harbourage, though both the Harland and the Foreland also were filled. And from them descended an army of power, with munition and provision for a war of great kings, or so it seemed to the people of the north, though this was but a small sending force of the whole might of Gondor. Most of all, the horses were praised, for many of them came from the Vales of Anduin, and with them were riders tall and fair, and proud princes of Rhovanion. Eärnur was a man like his father in valour, but not in wisdom, He was a man of strong body and hot mood, but he would take no wife, for his only pleasure was in fighting, and the exercise of arms. His prowess was such that none in Gondor could stand against him in those weapon sports in which he delighted, seeming rather a champion than a captain or king, and retaining his vigour and skill to a later age than was usual. By his side rode Aranath, oldest son of Arvedui. When all the forces had landed, Gillen summoned all who would come to him from Linden or Arnor, and when all was ready, the host crossed the Lune and marched north to challenge the Witch King of Angmar. The Witch King had occupied Fornost, from where he ruled his conquered lands. He had filled the ruined capital with evil folk, usurping the house and the rule of the kings. In his pride, he did not await the onset of his enemies in his stronghold, but went out to meet them, thinking to sweep them, as others before, into the Lune. With the host of the west, also hobbits of the Shire went, perhaps even Booker of the Marish, that would later become the first Thane of the Shire. The host of the west came down from the hills of Evendim and attacked the forces of the Witch King on the plain between Lake Nenuyil and the North Downs. It was a great battle, where many fell on either side. The forces of Angmar were already giving way and retreating towards Fornost, when the main body of the horsemen that had passed around the hills came down from the north and scattered them in a great rout. Here the horsemen of Iranian played a key part. Then the Witch King, with all that he could gather from the wreck, fled northwards, seeking his own land of Angmar. Before he could gain shelter of Khan Doom, the cavalry of Gondor overtook him, with Eärnur riding at their head. At the same time a force under Glorfindel, the Elf Lord, came up out of Rivendell, and in the Ettenmoors another battle took place. Then so utterly was Angmar defeated, that not a man nor an orc of that realm remained west of the mountains. But it is said that when all was lost, suddenly the Witch King himself appeared, black-robed and black-masked, upon a black horse. Fear fell upon all who beheld him, but he singled out the captain of Gondor, Eärnur, for the fullness of his hatred, and with a terrible cry he rode straight upon him. Eärnur would have withstood him, but his horse could not endure that onset, and it swerved and bore him far away before he could master it. Then the Witch King laughed, and none that heard it ever forgot the horror of that cry. But Glorfindel rode up then on his white horse, and in the midst of his laughter the Witch King turned to flight and passed into the shadows. For night came down on the battlefield, and he was lost, and none saw whither he went. Eärnur now rode back, but Glorfindel, looking into the gathering dark, said, "Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." These words many remembered, but Eärnur was angry, desiring only to be avenged for his disgrace, and ever on he sought to avenge himself upon the Witch King. So ended the evil realm of Angmar, and so did Eärnur, captain of Gondor, earn the chief hatred of the Witch King. But many years were still to pass before that was revealed. It was thus in the reign of King Eärnur, as later became clear, that the Witch King, escaping from the north, came to Mordor, and there gathered the other ringwraiths, of whom he was the chief, the Nazgul, and they would later conquer Minas Ithil and take the Palantir that was housed in its tower. But we will talk more about that another time. While Angmar lay in ruins, there were also many orcs and other servants of the Witch King that fled east, fleeing the host of the west. The Eärthir heard of the destruction of Angmar. The chieftain at the time was called Frumgar, and he led his people north to the upper vales of Anduin. Here the Eärthir drove away the remnants of the people of Angmar on the eastern sides of the Misty Mountains in 1977, only 2 years after the destruction of Angmar, and they settled the land between the Misty Mountains and the Forest River. Back in the remnants of Arnor, peace had at last returned to a region that had known nothing but war for centuries. The hobbits of the Shire ruled themselves and prospered. They chose a Thane to take the place of the king and were content. Though for a long time many still looked for the return of the king, but at last that hope was forgotten and remained only in the saying, "When the king comes back," used of some good that could not be achieved, or of some evil that could not be amended. Arvedui's son Aranath did not claim the title of King of Arnor, as the kingdom had been destroyed. Fornost reign was abandoned. The inhabitants of the nearest settlement, Bree, referred to it as Dead Man's Dyke. Only Dunedain rangers would sometimes go there, and the city would remain a ruin until the rule of Aragorn as King Elessar. Likewise with both Annúminas and Amon-Sul. Eärnur instead claimed the title of the chieftain of the Dunedain and ruled over the remnants of his people, thenceforth known as the Rangers of the North. When the kingdom ended, the Dunedain passed into the shadows and became a secret and wandering people, and their deeds and labours were seldom sung or recorded. Eärnur's son Araval was born in 2012 of the Third Age and raised in Rivendell, as were all the sons of chieftains after him, and Eärnur was entrusted with the safekeeping of the heirlooms of the North Kingdom, the Ring of Barahir, the Shards of Narsil, the Star of Elendil, and the Scepter of Annúminas. And here at last ends our tale about the Fall of Arnor. If you want to support the channel, you can join through Patreon or become a member here on YouTube. Thank you very much to all the current supporters. There are no words in English, Entish, Quenya, or Sindarin that can fully express my gratitude. Thank you. If you want to know more about Middle-earth and the lore, make sure to check out one of these videos next. As always, thank you for watching and being part of the Council of the Rings. Farewell till next time.